A man believed to be a British soldier was hacked to death by 2 attackers who were later shot and wounded by police.
We must fight them as they fight us. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. You people will never be safe.
This British man has to pay the price for your promise, Cameron.
By the time they'd stopped, at least 12 people were dead.
129 people were killed in Friday night's terror attacks in Paris. Authorities say 3 teams of attackers launched gun and bomb attacks at several locations in the French capital.
C'est un acte de guerre qui a été commis par une armée terroriste.
Nous ne pouvons pas perdre cette guerre, parce que c'est au fond une guerre de civilisation.
Islam is incompatible with all Western civilization.
The war is started. People just need to wake up and make a say.
They feel they are better. They feel they are more civilized than.
Xenophobic tidal that you can call it up.
In Saddam's Iraq, they will put you in front of a wall and shoot you. In Denmark, they strangle you slowly.
Now I think it's reached a stage where it's a bit intolerable. Every single part of our community is under scrutiny.
As a rabbi, as a Jew, as a human being, I'm shocked. I have never seen it as open, as virulent, as hateful as it is right now.
Anybody who isn't a Muslim has never been to a mosque. They're not places that other people would go to.
Their imams, their elder are really the problem.
Are we seeing a clash of civilizations? Many are saying Islam and European identity are incompatible and that Islam has contributed nothing to Western civilization. Others disagree.
Der Islam gehört zu Deutschland.
I mean, Muslims are part of Europe, through all histories.
As a Muslim scholar living in the West, I set out to seek the answers with my trusty team.
When you realize you've not really got close to your neighbors, you can either panic or you sit with them and listen.
Our journey is in 3 phases. We first explore the past in Andalusia and Sicily when different religions could live together. The next phase is of Ottoman expansion into Europe and resistance to it. And the final phase, closer to our times, is of European colonization and immigration. The first phase of our journey takes us to Andalusia and Sicily. Andalusia 1,000 years ago produced great inventors, scholars, and architecture. The capital, Cordoba, was the richest and most populous city of Europe, and its main library had 400,000 manuscripts. Jews, Christians, and Muslims lived, worked, created, and prospered together. Though relations did not always live up to the ideal. The great poet Akbar prayed in the Grand Mosque at Cordoba and wrote a famous poem about it. I prayed on the same spot 2 decades ago. Iqbal's poem hangs in the mayor's office.
La primera cosa que a mí me gustaría decirle al mundo musulmán es gracias, que parte de lo que hay en Córdoba se lo debemos a su cultura, se lo debemos a su carácter, se lo debemos a su esfuerzo y esa huella está viva y se percibe en la ciudad de Córdoba, pues que esta es su casa también y que nosotros no lo percibimos como una amenaza, sino que estamos encantados de recibirlo y de que se sientan cómodos en esta ciudad.
My granddaughter Anna had practiced a courtesy bow for the mayor.
Cordoba 1,000 years ago was one of the 3 more important towns in the Arab world. But at that time there were Islamic population. The kingdom of the Caliphate was of course a Muslim kingdom. But there were also Christian populations and Hebrew population.
There are descriptions of Andalusia as a paradise. Religion was lived here in a very spiritual way, beyond dogmas and in a very simple and harmonious way.
En el siglo X, Córdoba era la gran ciudad del mundo. Teníamos a Averroes, a Maimónides, a los mejores poetas, los mejores escritores, los mejores músicos, filósofos, médicos, gracias a una visión amplia, no reducida.
It was a place where everybody was welcome, where everybody could put their own part.
There were many overlapping elements of all three cultures.
Those people were able, even though they were different, they were able to cooperate and work together. And this is what convivencia is about.
It was a very peaceful century, the 10th century, so they could make a lot of progresses accordingly, and they made a lot of progresses in all the sciences. Culture was very important, education for everybody, for men and women.
When the whole of Europe and the West were in sort of a dark history or dark ages, it was Islam was being a contributor to the humanity of the West. They were the one who translated from 9th, 10th century onward all the Greek and Roman books. And through that translation, mathematics came to the West. Through that translation, we were aware of medicine. Through that translation, we were blessed to understand a lot of things about food, about health.
I'd say the whole of medieval Jewish philosophy could not have come into existence without Islamic philosophy. The rules of literature and grammar are basically taken from Muslim grammarians.
Moses Maimonides.
Attack near
One important aspect of our project, Journey into Europe, was to meet and interview women. We were delighted to meet the women of Granada, and what was so special about them was that many were converts to Islam. These Western women were bringing their optimism and dynamism to Islam and giving it a new vigor in the land of Andalusia.
So, Assalamu alaikum, sisters. It's so nice to be here in your beautiful mosque with Al-Hamra Palace behind us. Can you all introduce yourselves, please?
I'm Munira Mendoza.
Fauzia Benedetti.
Suleiha Singh. I Iman Travieso.
And Hannah Whiteman. Okay, I was born and raised in California.
I was born in Switzerland. I've lived in England. Born and raised in Cape Town, South Africa.
I was born in Spain.
And I was born in England.
And what attracted you to Spain?
It's enchanting. It has something about it, you know. It has a pull because, you know, we're Muslims. We have, for us, this is like a heritage that we can't, I don't think we can create nowadays. It's fantastic, you know, it's beautiful. It's like the kind of the height of the Muslim reign here in Europe. Because I also live among lots of Muslim women and they have their mothers and they study and they travel and they work and I find it also now easy to talk about my religion. Now I live here among people who are similar to me, for lots of Muslim friends and Muslim acquaintances, and it's easier now to be able to reach out to people because I feel more confident about it. Okay.
Now, what is the role that women play in the mosque and in the community?
I mean, without women, there wouldn't be a community. They'd just be an army.
Yeah. The men are into politics, but the women are doing the real stuff, the real work at home.
And there's a great warmth between the sisters because when we said our prayers yesterday in the mosque, everybody turned to each other and they kissed each other.
Like the Spanish.
Yeah.
Kissed each other. Very Mediterranean.
Is that Spanish? Is that Sufi?
I think one feels family, no? Here.
It helps.
Yeah, and I think it's a Spanish habit between women to kiss each other.
Or is it la convivencia?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know. I mean, I suppose it's still left that kind of essence in a way. I think, you know.
You know, it's like in any small village. We are like a village inside Granada. So the convivence is sometimes we love each other. Sometimes we fight. Like in every human group, we are different personalities, different backgrounds, you know. We are in the same place because we are Muslim, you know, and after 30 years you love the people who are around you.
Have you converted to Islam, or were you born into Islam? What's your story?
I converted. I'm one of the...
Well, I was born because my parents converted. My parents are Malaysian origin, so my great-grandparents are Muslim and I'm Muslim too.
I was converted to Islam, yeah, 30 few years ago. Because at that moment they were very, very few Muslim in Spain. It was like something very strange. Many years, many people tell me that I speak very well Spanish. And when I try to say, yes, I am Spanish, I am from Valladolid, the place where they speak the best Spanish. The people don't understand, no? Now, start to know that there are many Spanish Muslims, you know. But before it was something impossible. As a Muslim, I feel sometimes foreigner in Spain and foreigner among the Muslims.
Are there many converts to Islam?
Yes, I think, and in the last years, here in the mosque every week is people who converted every week. The government in Spain, they say they tried to make that convivence between different communities, but when you hear the news in the TV or you read in the newspaper about Muslims, it's all negative, all about terrorism and things like this. So that made it difficult, you know. But I can say that at the beginning of living here in Granada, the people of the city, they were very unconfident, you know, with us. Because,
they couldn't stand.
30 years back.
They wouldn't let us, if we wore a scarf, they wouldn't rent houses. There used to be, I have had rocks thrown at me. There were writings on the wall. There's a very despictive word which is called mordo in Spanish, saying like mortos go home. They couldn't stand it. They were terrified. They thought we were going to take over the Albaicin. They thought we were going to take over Granada.
I think a huge fear factor has been created here, and it's still there. You know, my brother grew up in Spain, and the history book started at 1492, the fall of Granada.
I want to ask one more question about the hijab.
You have to bring it up. It's just like the token question.
Yeah, we have to bring it up.
That's all right, I'll forgive you.
So, what are your comments?
That the hijab came for the Muslim women to be respected. So this is the mission of the hijab. So in the moment that suppose any other thing, you can. This is up to you, the situation where you live, you know.
And when we wear the hijab, we are always making a political statement. And I sometimes don't have the strength. I don't feel strong enough to make that political statement. I just want to go across the street and buy the bread.
Hijab is a very sort of personal thing at the moment, because as Monida says, you're like making a statement, especially in this Europe. If it's going to be a problem, and if it's going to bring you problems, the most important thing is to dress modestly, because there's a lot of people that walk around in hijab and
the most important is the intention.
And the intention. So, you know, it's a bit of a balance thing.
Well, I started wearing a scarf when I was 18, 19, and I really felt it, and I felt empowered and strong, and I came to Spain and it all fell apart. It really did. I had some terrible comments with my older generation, Spanish older generation in Cordoba, and I remember feeling so awful and thinking, this is the opposite of what I wanted, you know. It makes them feel bad. It reminds them something that they obviously don't understand, and I stopped wearing it, and I don't wear a scarf on a daily basis.
Some people say that European identity and Islamic identity are incompatible.
I disagree.
What do you think about that?
We're European Muslim.
I mean, for me, Islam is like a filter, you know. It's a way to filter in the good or bad, to filter in the good and to keep out the bad.
Of each society,
I mean,
culture.
in every society there are good and bad things, you know, and Islam is just a filter of the good and the bad.
Yeah. And I think the term is European Muslims, not Muslims in Europe.
Yeah, but
right? It's like we are European and we're Muslims and we're European, but we're not Muslims in Europe. We're European Muslims.
We'll now begin our session, and I'd like to invite Beena Shah and our panelists to come on stage.
Hello? Can you hear me? Yes. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Beena Shah, and I'm a writer and author. I am here today in conversation with Dr. Shafkat Ali Shah Jamud, to my left. We are here today to talk about Professor Akbar Ahmed's book, Journey into Europe, I beg your pardon. The first one was Journey into Islam. The second, Journey into Europe. Dr. Akbar Ahmed, who is a personal friend of Dr. Shah's and of our family, spent 4 years traveling across Europe with a team of researchers and asked a lot of questions, met a lot of people, trying to dig out the truth about Muslims in Europe, or European Muslims. And primarily his primary motivating question was, is Islam and Europe compatible or incompatible? And the 4 years of research that he conducted evolved into this book, which is on sale here today, published by OUP. Now, neither Professor Ahmed nor his daughter, who you saw in the film, Dr. Amina Hoti, could be here today because of the situation, the airports. It's rather inevitable. So we did a little scrambling around, and Dr. Shah, who has read the book, it's an amazing book. It's quite long, but it's well worth it. And so we're going to have a little conversation about some of the points that were raised that you had a teaser of in the film, and some of the other questions that are on all of our minds today as we look at Europe, as we look at the world, and as we look at the place of Muslims in this world. So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Shah to you. Full disclosure, he is my father. But today we are here as moderator and guest. Dr. Shah is an agriculturalist by profession, but he's branched out into agriculture-based industry. Some of you may know him from his days as a minister for agriculture, federal minister, and also a provincial minister for education. But even before that, he has been a scholar, a visiting professor at the University of Sindh and the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, Virginia. He has a PhD in international relations from the University of Virginia and a master's in foreign affairs. I'm sorry, is it the other way around? He has a PhD in foreign affairs from the University of Virginia and a master's from the University of Sindh in international relations. So today we're going to just have a very easygoing conversation, and hopefully we'll be able to elucidate some of the points of the book for you, and we'll leave about 10 minutes at the end for questions. Let me start by getting something out of the way. The name Akbar Ahmed, Professor Akbar Ahmed, has been a controversial one in Pakistan. There have been a lot of questions about his scholarship, about his authenticity, about his genuineness. And so I would like to ask you, not just as a friend, but as a fellow scholar, what is your opinion of Akbar Ahmed's scholarly credentials?
Thank you for that elaborate introduction. My task has been made easy because every time I want to skip over some of the thoughts, I'll pass them on to you. On a personal note, I got to know Akbar Ahmed from 1988. There was my spiritual mentor who kept telling me, contact Akbar Ahmed. I said, I will do it. He kept repeating. Over a period of time, I kept on delaying. At this time, Akbar Ahmed was the commissioner of Quetta. So finally, I said I should get in touch with him. I made a call. And this was May 29th, 1988. So I called him up. I didn't know him. I had known of his works. And the commissioner sahab had gone for a walk. So the PA said, sir, nahi hai commissioner sahab, वापस आते हैं तो आपसे बात करवाते हैं. So sure enough, after an hour, Dr. Akbar Ahmed, Commissioner Quetta, called me up, and we got to talk. And this was a historical moment for me, but also for the country, because while we were talking, General Ziaul Haq was dissolving the assemblies exactly at that time. So while our conversation was going on, I was out of a job, and Pakistan had lost its democratic government. And we've always talked about this, and that what a moment to get associated. We have been lifelong friends since. And we've had the most enjoyable, long conversations. Every time we've met, time has been short. But Akbar Ahmed is a very interesting person. In fact, he's a spiritual person.
You're speaking as his friend, but I'm still going to push you on what you think of him as a scholar.
I'm coming to that. He was trained as a social anthropologist, and later on he got interested in Islam. His academic interest and scholarly work led him from his position as Commissioner Quetta to become Akbar professor at Cambridge University. And he spent a very long time there. After that tenure, as many of you may know, he became for a short time Pakistan's High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. And that short-lived tenure ended in his shift from Great Britain to the United States, where he was offered a chair at the American University, Ibn Khaldun chair. So Akbar Ahmed was in two minds. There was an offer for him to go to the American University of Beirut and whether to go to America. So we finally made the right choice to go to America, because in America he has flourished as ambassador of interfaith dialogue. That's the big thing that he's gotten into. And his scholarship has grown exponentially in this period. He has written many books. He's a very respected scholar. Some people consider him as one of the best modern scholars on Islam. He has been involved in advising the royal family in England. For instance, when Princess Diana was to visit Pakistan, he was the one who went and gave her the basic lessons on Islam and what to expect in Pakistan. Prince Charles is also, he's been an advisor to the Prince Charles, one of the members of a group that advises the Prince of Wales, the future King of England. So his role has been very solid. As a scholar, people in Pakistan, unfortunately, have not valued him for his worth. And he's been valued world over, in America, in Europe, in Britain. So he's a true ambassador for Islam, for Pakistan. But here in Pakistan, we just simply don't know his worth, as we normally don't respect the jewels that are Pakistanis. This is how much I would say about his scholarship as a scholar.
Well, that's a very strong endorsement, and yes, I would second that. I mean, Akbar Ahmed is doing very important work in interfaith relations in the United States. He's been a very strong advocate for American Muslims who have suffered under a lot of pressure and a lot of discrimination, and he has made it his life's work to meet with religious leaders of all faiths in the United States, Jew Jewish, Christian, Catholic, Protestant, Hindu, Buddhist, and to build bridges that hopefully people can cross and come together.
He's very passionate about this because he himself is a man who understands these issues very deeply. And that goes to show his bent of mind, his scholarly capabilities. And the work he's done, this book, it's a fourth of the quartet that he's produced in the last 4 or 5 years. He started with this journey into Islam, then he did a journey into America. The third book of the quartet was The Thistle and the Drone. And the fourth book, Journey into Europe, is a very timely book. It has come at a time when Muslims are being persecuted all over. And in Europe, the dilemma is profound. If you see the issue of immigrants, you read about the problem of immigrants all the time, whether it's France, whether it's Germany, or even the other peripheral states of Europe. Muslim immigrants are having a difficult time. They're being persecuted, they're being targeted, and in fact, the immigrants have given they've acted as a catalyst to other forces in Europe, the ultra-right forces in Europe. In some ways, you can almost see that the European society is becoming unhinged. The cohesion in the European society, in Europe itself, is becoming unhinged. I think the beginning of this phenomenon has to be traced back. And
so you would say, sorry to interrupt you would say that the shift in the quartet, shifting focus from the United States to Europe, is an attempt to get back to the origins?
The origins are important. You have to know the context. You have to know the historical process, because you see, the Europeans have been very taunting. Not only have they been belligerent towards the Muslims, it's not the Muslim immigrants who are a target, but even Muslims who are there. There's second-generation Muslims settled in many of the European countries. For instance, in France, there are Muslims from Algeria, from Morocco. In United Kingdom, you have Muslims from Pakistan in particular, or you have in Germany the guest workers, the Turks. So there are generations of Muslims who were born in these European states. And today they are targets of the hate, of the violence, and their identity is being questioned all the time. And you've got to look at the root cause. One of the, sorry, I'll just end this. One of the most important points that is being raised, that the European people are saying that you don't belong here. You have no links to Europe, and you are the enemy. So this is a very important point. But Akbar Ahmed is saying, wait a minute, there is a history. So I'll get to that. You had something on your mind.
Yeah. So what I want to ask you, it's a very complex situation. It's a very complex paradigm that Akbar Ahmed has picked up and is attempting to pull apart for readers. You said that, not only are we talking about immigrants, first generation, but second generation and generations back of people who have now been living in Europe for perhaps 100 years, 100 years, as well as societies, for example, Bosnia, where Bosnians are quite simply Europe's Muslims. They are native to Europe. They look like Europeans. They speak the European languages. They are of that land. Let me ask you a question, though. Let me turn it around. We're quite clear about what Europeans are doing, or certain right-wing, the nationalist movements and their belligerence towards Muslims. Are Muslims doing anything that might be provoking these reactions? What the stereotypes of Muslims, they refuse to integrate, they refuse to assimilate, they want to roll back things such as women's rights or rights for homosexuals, rights for, So are Muslims acting according to stereotype, and basically is the European fear and animosity towards them justified in any way?
There is an element of truth in that, and I think that's a major element that Akbar Ahmed has tried to address. But go back into history. I mean, there was a time which Akbar talks in his book where in Spain, Muslims were the role model for harmony, interfaith harmony. For 500 years, Muslims in Spain facilitated the transition of Europe from Dark Ages to Renaissance and then modern Europe. So Muslims have been responsible for this transition. Now, these are some of the facts that a lot of the Europeans want to just brush under the rug. That what has been the contribution of Muslims for 500 years to European civilization, to European culture. And for this, Akbar is so passionate about it. And his love for Andalusia is amazing, of what was done and the contributions of the Muslims, literally bringing Europe out of the Dark Ages.
Yes, it's been known as the Golden Age, and there was a term being used in the film. I don't know if you caught on it, but it's convivencia. That is the word for the harmony in which the Muslims ruled over the Christians and Jews.
Not only ruled, they lived in harmony with the Jews, the Christians, and they were living in a society where they prospered, they kept intellectually challenged. Akbar Ahmed calls it the ethos of ilm.
Ilm, as in the
ilm,
Muslim term for
Muslim
knowledge.
Term, ilm. That ilm ethos facilitated for the growth of subjects like philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, you name it.
Algebra.
Algebra. And you have great philosophers like Averroes, Ibn Rushd. Now, had it not been for Ibn Rushd, the world would have not known about Plato, Aristotle, the Greek philosophy, and how Europeans claim their inheritance to Greek civilization. And yet, if it had not been for the Muslims, the Europeans would have no knowledge about that civilization.
Yes, that's a big debate, actually, in intellectual circles, where there is a movement to link the start of Europe to the Greek and Roman civilizations and completely bypass the Islamic, the Moorish, indeed, the complete development.
Indeed.
And we traveled, actually, as a family to Andalusia 2 years ago, and they did tell us, in fact, when we were there, that there's an attempt to erase this part of history from Spanish textbooks. Just as we in Pakistan have tried to erase our pre-Islamic civilization from our textbooks and we don't teach our children, they are doing the same with their textbooks. What do you think is the danger in something like that, when it is actual, educational doctrine to remove a part of history?
That's an important factor. It's a deep-rooted factor. For instance, how do societies move? That's a question you ask yourself. How do you interpret history when the narrative is so flawed? So these are questions that are erupting up in Europe. And let me backtrack a little bit and look at the context. For instance, Akbar Ahmed is saying that there were 3 Muslim invasions of Europe. The first one he defines as the one that came with the Umayyad dynasty being established in Spain. 500 years of this particular dynasty surviving. Eventually it was thrown out of Spain and Portugal and from Italy, followed by a second invasion by the Seljuk Turks, the Ottomans, who went into Europe, and there was a battle, war, political issues. Turks were thrown out of Europe. And this is the time when the Europeans got out of their shell. They had gotten out of the Dark Age, they had gotten into the age of Renaissance, and now the Europeans were feeling confident because they had acquired their inner strength, and came the age of colonialism. So if you look at this, how the evolution of history has taken place. When you have colonialism, the first major colonial effort was made by the Spaniards when they went into America in 1452. And look what they did to the Americas. So you had the Spanish effort in America, you had the British and the French effort and the German effort into Africa, into Asia, into China. So this whole period of the Renaissance, while Europe was discovering itself, gaining its strength, it was also expanding. And the colonial support for the economic growth made Europeans strong and powerful. In fact, they used this economic facilities to strengthen their intellect, their mind. And if you look at the entire philosophy, the growth of Europe, the colonial conquests were responsible for Europe getting that strength. But not to forget about the scientific discoveries, industrialization, and so on and so forth.
And so the third wave of Muslim movement into Europe.
Immigrants. This is what Akbar Ahmed.
Post-colonial?
Post-colonial, definitely. Post-colonial. But the world has changed because, you see, after the Second World War, Europe lost its preponderance. It was taken over by America and a peripheral state of Europe called Russia, which had become a Soviet Russia. So for 70 years to the present, non-European powers have been dominant in the world.
Can I just stop you there? Yeah. And before we leave the subject of Andalusia and move into the colonialism and the post-colonialism era, Akbar Ahmed has the observation in his book that we often look at Andalusia as the highlight of Muslim achievement, but he does warn us not to get too nostalgic about that era. In fact, he says, and I quote, our idea of Andalusia as this golden age, this pinnacle of Muslim achievement and this absolute harmony utopia is dated, impractical, and has little legitimacy today. Could you tell us what he means by that? And, you know, on the one hand, he is so admiring and so passionate about Andalusia, but he says, don't get caught up in dreams of the glorious past. So how does he handle that in his book?
My understanding is that he is referring to the change in the ground realities of the world as it is today. Mm-hmm. You see, Muslims were dominant in another age, another era, another time. Today's world is a different world. For instance, today is the world of technology, of scientific growth that is unimaginable, the way we've moved in the field of science. For instance, you're living in a world of artificial intelligence where people are doing so many things, and these people primarily are the European Western people who've made these breakthroughs in the scientific field and the economic strength, in their social development. The negative aspect, again, I will take you back to the 20th century. For instance, 20th century was, Brzezinski had called the century of the mega death. 2 world wars, scores of revolutions, scores of civil wars. Europe just tore itself apart. And the consequence of this was that non-Europeans became the power brokers of the world, United States, Russia. So if you look at the shift in the global power configuration, now such changes do have an impact on social issues as well. But the world of today is a world in which Samuel Huntington wrote about 25 years ago, The Clash of Civilizations. And this had happened when there's Western Civil War between America and Russia, called the Cold War. When the Cold War ended, the new world order had been established, and this is again that's perpetuated, the situation perpetuated into what we are facing as Muslims, the Islamophobia, the event of 9/11, which led to the so-called war on terror.
And in fact, the right-wingers that are, you know, really trying to pose themselves as the inheritors of the political mantle in Europe, they are very much sold on the idea of the clash of civilizations and the assertion that Islam and Europe are incompatible. Let me ask you, since we are limited in time, so we aren't supposed to be nostalgic about the old Andalusia, but Akbar Ahmed does pose that we could look at the idea of a new Andalusia which is better suited to our 21st century. But again, I'm sorry, we're just so short of time, and this book is so full of interesting ideas and theories. Let's talk very briefly about what may be Akbar Ahmed's most interesting assertion in the book. He turns the mirror around and he actually shines it on Europe itself, and he uses his expertise. In his previous life, he was the collector, he was the commissioner, and he specialized in tribal customs, tribal habits as an anthropologist. He actually turns around and says, well, if you look at it, Europe itself is a tribal society. Tell us about that and why that may be such a surprising theory to look at.
I'm
Europe
glad you
through
brought
this
this
lens.
up, because that's a very interesting theory, and I think this is where you see the genius of Akbar Ahmed. For his ability to go deep into the basis of societies. And I think in this book he's made a remarkable reference to the German people. And he has highlighted this fact that in Europe, German people are the most important people, they're central people, they're the heartland of Europe. Mm-hmm. So I was fascinated by this because I myself have been a great admirer of the German people, and the kind of things he said in this book about the Germans is something that was music to my ears.
Such as?
Well, such as the German belief that they're the best, and they've proven it, not by words, but by their actions, and the contributions they've made to the harmony of Europe. If you look at the German history, ever since the end of the Roman Empire, it's the Germans who have contributed to a lot of important developments in European history.
Sorry, just come a little closer to the mic. We're losing.
All right, it's too close to me. But if you look at history, the Germans played a very important role in ending the papal authority in European history. Mm-hmm. For instance, the development of Protestantism in Europe, they were the Germans who questioned that. If you look at the philosophical thinking, the theories that were brought up, for instance, Akbar Ahmed's favorite philosopher, two favorite philosophers of his are Max Weber, a German sociologist, who had laid the foundation, who had contributed to the definition of the modern European state system. Mm-hmm. And then his other favorite philosopher is, of course, Ibn Khaldun. Ibn Khaldun is a philosopher par excellence.
But specifically, how does he analyze Germany through the lens of tribalism?
He has talked about, this is very interesting, because he's talked about Germany's continuity in his belief, and I'll just say what makes Germany so important. For instance, there are 4 or 5 aspects of German culture. Folk, which means people. Heimat, homeland, Aryan, race, Gentiloven, code of conduct, and Hegi, quality of life. So the German people have been very determined about who they are, what they believe in, and they have a very strong sense of their race. They believe theirs is the most pure race. Because of this belief, they think that they should rule the world.
Well, this isn't always a positive thing, though.
Well,
as we have seen,
it got a lot of negativity during the time of Adolf Hitler, but there is a continuous belief in this these factors that the Germans are pure people, and even today the Germans would tell you we are the best. We produce the best things. We do everything that is the best. And if you look at the resilience, for instance, the amount of suffering the Germans had during the 2 world wars, they just emerged back into being a strong society and a people and a country.
And today, actually, Germany under Angela Merkel has taken a leadership role in the assimilation of Muslim refugees, especially displaced during the Syrian and Iraq war. So
I think we're running short of time.
I want just an idea from the audience. How many people would like to ask questions? Okay, so we will wrap it up.
We'll have to stop here, really, because
we'll wrap it up by just saying that I think that what Akbar Ahmed concludes is that we're looking for a new Andalusia where perhaps, interestingly, the model of Scotland might be one to take as an example. Alex Salmon, the Scottish politician, talks about a tartan tribalism, which is flexible enough to accept immigrants of diverse backgrounds, and actually Muslims have settled and live quite happily in Scotland as compared to England and the rest of Europe. So that might be something to examine.
On this, I think Akbar is too optimistic.
He's too optimistic.
He's too optimistic. We are far, far from achieving that utopia. I think the world is in a different state of existence. So we'll leave it at that.
Yes, I think actually the New York Times review of his book did say that the outlook is grim, and we're a long way to achieving a new Andalusia.
Okay,
but
I didn't read that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shah, for your thoughts on this very important book, which I do hope that you will consider purchasing and at least skimming through, if not reading the whole thing. It's how many pages long?
About 450 pages, but it's a fascinating book.
That's about 400 pages more than I have the time or stamina for, so thank you for reading it for all of us. We'll go ahead with some questions. And yes, lady in the front, and then the lady after her, and then we'll get to the gentleman.
Mr. Jamot, considering Akbar Ahmed's marvelous credentials, 2 questions. Marvelous credentials, why is there this bias in this country against him? And the other one, I thought the Germans had got over the purity of race after Hitler. I didn't know it was still extant.
We'll limit it to 1 question just because we have a lot of people that want questions, so you get to choose
these are fair
one.
questions. I'll just quickly answer them.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
First of all, I think we need to grow up as a people. We need to have an intellectual growth where we can appreciate a real talent, if you will, in the field of academics and serious studies. I can give you many examples of how we have let down people.
No, please don't. We'll be here all day.
And your second part of the question, there's something about Germans that has been so consistent for so long that it just cannot be shooed away, or for 1 century's wrongs or misadventures, if you will. The German people are very resilient, and they have a very strong character. And this is, again, something one must look into, because there are certain traditional, tribal identities of the German people that make this belief very strong within them.
Which is exactly what Akbar Ahmed is talking about.
This is what he's talking about. And they're sensitive because they've been made to believe in this issue. They've been drummed into their minds that they did something so wrong their anti-Semitic policies, and they had caused the destruction of Europe. But the Germans had a cause for all that. So if you look into the German history, there are serious issues that need to be addressed and talked about.
We'll move on to the next question. Thank
Yes,
you very much. Lady in the front.
When we look at the issue of the clash of civilizations, it's mainly rooted in the lack of assimilation as far as the diaspora is concerned. And if you look deep into that, that boils down to the issue of spirituality. Because if you're looking at whether it's European tribalism or capitalism, it's rooted in worldly excellence. And if you look at gender roles in Islam or the other issues, that talks about giving up the world, you know, not living hijab and all of those issues. They are more about spirituality. So does he address this issue that, because this is not something that can be reconciled? I hope I'm able to phrase what I'm saying.
No, you are. And in fact, that is a question that really needs deep looking into, because we are talking about humanity. When you talk about the kind of things you mention, that's a question of humanity. And can we create that humanity? Because what have we done? Europe has gone into this modern nationalism. You see, the Renaissance gave them a certain boost to get out of the Dark Ages. But where did they go? They went into nationalism. If you look at the definition of nationalism, nationalism is based on certain laws and democracy and so on and so forth. But where is the humanism? Where is that compassion? Where is that sense of justice? And the sense of justice doesn't have to come through courts as such. It has to come within societies where people can feel the sense of justice. And this is where the true message and the spirit of Islam has to be kept in mind. This is the essence of what we should be striving for, that we live in the context of a nation state. Now, can we get out of this nation state? Because nation state is an artificial creation. Islam transcends the boundaries of a nation state. When we talk about ummah, we're talking about spirituality, we're talking about a higher level of our existence as humans. And that is the biggest shortfall for the people who have bound themselves into the philosophies of nation states and man-made laws. We have simply ignored the laws of nature, the laws of God, that should be our guiding principle and guiding light.
I'd just like to add to that, that it's a very good question, and I think the point is that each of the, if you're looking at Europeans versus Muslims, which is a false paradigm anyway, because there are European Muslims. But each of the cultures has so much to learn from each other. And they're just busy saying which is better and dominating and drowning each other out, rather than saying, let's sit down and talk, which is what Akbar Ahmed's work is essentially about. Sitting down, talking to each other, learning from one another.
Dialogue of nations.
Dialogue rather than a clash of civilizations. Why not? Next question, please.
Yes.
My question is, beside this Andalusia part of Spain, which other parts in Europe Mr. Akbar Ahmed has covered, like which other countries or parts he has covered in this book?
He is talking about the assimilation in United Kingdom. For instance, United Kingdom, the immigrants, a large number of immigrant settlers have been in United Kingdom from the subcontinent. There is the example of the Turkish guest workers in Germany. the Algerian and the Moroccan, North African settlers in France. Now, in those countries, the experience has not been great. There has been a division between those settlers in those countries and the indigenous people. Somehow, in the United Kingdom, the assimilation has been relatively better. And this is a very stark reality that the island nation of United Kingdom, colonial power, probably has been able to understand more, better. It's more multicultural. But the experience, colonial experience of the French and the Germans and the Italians was not very good. You know, there was a conflict between the indigenous people and the colonizers. The example of British colonial experience, say, in the subcontinent. Now, we are speaking in the language today. Can you imagine? 200 years later, we are talking in their language. We're wearing the attire that they have introduced. So those are factors that Akbar Ahmed has talked about.
We have time for one last question, and it's going to be the gentleman in the front. Use the microphone, please. And please be sure it's a question.
According to your documentary film and...
no, we didn't.
It's not mine.
Nothing to do with this film.
Sir, I would like to know what is the popular narrative of Islam has been spreading, have inspiration for the European non-Muslim peoples, because they have a lot of threats of the Islamic extremism or Islamic fundamentalism and Muslim. Do you think Muslim have been losing their identity being a Muslim as an extremist Muslim? Or do you think in future for spreading the message of Islam, Islam is a religion of peace and prosperity? This narrative of Islam we have been losing in Europe countries, in European peoples.
In 30 seconds or less.
Some of it is happening today. Some of it is happening. There are people who are converts, and I'll briefly have to end this sadly. Akbar Ahmed has a few pages written about this MTV disc jockey, Christina, what was her name?
Oh, the lady.
The lady, she became a Muslim. And
what's her name?
Christian
Becker. And she's been a speaker at the Lit Fest last year. She was here.
So there are examples like that, high-profile converts. And there are people who are converting to Islam. The message is beginning to sink in a little bit, but it's still a long way off. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Dr. Jamud. Thank you to OUP, and thank you to Akbar Ahmed, who's not here with us today, but thank you.